we should come together and work on this issue? Is it a problem that we can delay until the next session, or should we try to address it during the coming months of this session before we close?
Madam President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
I'd be delighted to respond to the senator from Connecticut in two ways. The first is that, as the senator so well pointed out, this is not a future threat or a prospective threat that we need to prepare ourselves against. This is an ongoing current threat. There is a campaign of attacks into our national security infrastructure, into our intellectual property, and into our critical infrastructure like the power grids and the communications networks that we count on in our daily lives for what we considered the American standard of living here at home. So time is not our friend. As one of the individuals I quoted said, I think it was Admiral McConnell, the day to get this done was yesterday. So the sooner the better, but we do need to form a consensus in this body, enough to move through the parliamentary obstacles that exist in this body, that allows us to go forward, and that allows us to go forward in a way that does something serious about forcing the operators of our critical infrastructure to put in adequate cybersecurity protections. If they have to do it because they have incentives to do it, that's one way of getting there. If they have to do it because they have regulations that demand it, that's another way of getting there. There are different ways to get there, and as you and I have discussed, and as we're working actually on together, we're open to different ways to get there. But it should be non-negotiable amongst us in the Senate that getting there, getting to the point where America's critical infrastructure is protected from cyber attack as reasonably well we can, that should be a non-negotiable goal. Anything short of that should be seen as failure. The other thing I wanted to add, you were very generous in your remarks and in your credentialing of a great number of senators who've been working very hard on this. I would like to also single out Senator Coons, who's been very helpful in our efforts. And I'll stay on our side of the aisle at this point, particularly Senator Mikulski. Barbara Mikulski serves on the Intelligence Committee. She is keenly aware of the cyber threat. She has taken deep dives into this issue in her role as a cardinal on the Appropriations Committee. She does the appropriations for many of the national security agencies and law enforcement agencies that are deeply involved in this. So when she speaks with real authority, and she speaks with real impact. And her participation in this effort, I think, is extraordinarily helpful, in addition to the effort of the many senators who you singled out as well. So with that, I will yield the floor. I see the senator from Louisiana is here, and I thank the senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the Senate floor to talk about a priority of mine. That's been the case since I first came to the U.S. Senate, and that is reimportation, changing federal law appropriately to allow Americans to buy safe, cheaper prescription drugs from Canada and other countries. Mr. President, we all know prescription drug prices are sky high in the United States. They're sky high by any metric, by any measure, certainly in this down economy, certainly for folks like seniors on a fixed income, and they're particularly sky high when you compare those drug prices to the prices of exactly the same drugs in other countries, including other Western industrialized countries like Canada immediately to our north. For this reason, from the very beginning of my work in the Senate, I've laid out a number of solutions that I think would make the situation a lot better, including generics reform, which I'm working on in a bipartisan way with other members of the Senate. But one of those proposed solutions has been reimportation. Again, changing federal law, as I think we absolutely need to do to allow American seniors, all Americans, to buy safe, cheaper prescription drugs from other countries like Canada. And let me emphasize, we're talking about exactly the same prescription drugs as we can buy here at much higher prices. We're only talking about FDA-approved drugs. We're talking about drugs coming from the same sources, manufacturing sites, either in this country, and those drugs go to Canada and other countries, or sometimes from third-party countries, and the drugs come to both Canada and the United States. Now, Mr. President, when I first came to the Senate, we were on the verge of passing that legislation. I worked in a bipartisan way with a large group of senators, including Senator Byron Dorgan of North Dakota, who was one of the leaders of the issue at the time, John McCain on our Republican side, many others, Olympia Snowe, were involved in this issue. And one of those strong, vocal supporters of reimportation was then Senator Barack Obama. He took a very clear position as a U.S. Senator, being strongly in support of reimportation. He voted for the full-fledged reimportation bill in 2007. As he became a presidential candidate, that strong, clear support continued during the presidential campaign. Then candidate Obama clearly stated again his strong, crystal clear support for reimportation. In fact, he used very feisty language about it. He claimed he would fight Big Pharma, the big pharmaceutical companies, stating, quote, "We'll take them on, hold them accountable for the prices they charge," close quote, and, quote, "Drug companies are exploiting Americans by dramatically overcharging U.S. consumers," close quote. Well, unfortunately, Mr. President, after then-candidate Obama was elected president, some things changed. And the biggest thing that changed was the Obamacare proposal and all of the backroom deals, bartering, and deal-making that led to its passage through Congress. I had those concerns at the time. In fact, I spoke very clearly about them here on the Senate floor, that there were some backroom deals going on, essentially trading reimportation, the White House pledging to oppose reimportation, clearly against what the President ran on, how he served in the United States Senate, if Big Pharma would join the effort to pass Obamacare into law. And, Mr. President, more recently, in the last few months, emails and other evidence has surfaced that clearly confirm that that's exactly what went on. In fact, the House Energy and Commerce Committee has had an investigation into this issue, and it is revealed and made very clear closed-door negotiations about Obamacare that essentially struck a deal between Big Pharma and the White House saying, you support Obamacare, you help us pass it, you produce advertising dollars to do that, and we'll deep six, kill forever reimportation. As I said, this House investigation has laid out a clear pattern of emails and other communications that tell the story very clearly. Pharma emails, for instance, say, quote, Rahm, meaning then White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel, Rahm will make it clear that Pharma needs a direct line of communication, separate and apart from any other coalition members, close quote. And then again, on June 10th of 2009, the pharma lobbyists meeting with White House officials, coming out of that meeting, they said they had discussed the details, quote, and the expected financial gain from health reform, close quote. The same House investigation has revealed meetings between administration top officials and other special interest groups, including meetings at the DSCC, Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, to coordinate political operations. Pharma lobbyists attending these meetings to learn about White House messaging and, quote, how our effort can be consistent with that, close quote. And then the final big deal was struck. And the big deal, as revealed clearly by this evidence and these emails, was very clear. Pharma, the big pharmaceutical companies, would support Obamacare, not just in word, but in deed, including putting up $70 million to help fund an advertising campaign in support of the passage of Obamacare. That $70 million from the biggest pharmaceutical companies went to two 501c4 groups, Healthy Economy Now and Americans for Stable Quality Care. And these groups were formed specifically to advertise and promote the passage of Obamacare. The former group was actually created after a meeting discussing the need for these efforts at the DSCC, a Democratic campaign arm. In addition, Big Pharma, the biggest pharmaceutical companies, offered $80 billion in payment reductions and other parts of health care financing in order, again, to secure their top priority, killing, in their mind, hopefully forever, reimportation. In June, President Obama's top White House health care advisor, Nancy Ann DeParle, wrote to Pharma that the Obama administration had, quote, made the decision based on how constructive you guys have been to oppose importation, close quote. And later, after that, Pharma lobbyist emails confirm the deal. And specifically, they highlighted a conversation that a Pharma lobbyist had with the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Jim Messina, writing, the Pharma lobbyist writing, quote, confidential. White House is working on some very explicit language on importation to kill it in health care reform, close quote. In August 2009, Pharma's top lobbyist at the time, Billy Tozat, made it crystal clear as well, quote, we were assured you will have a rock-solid deal, close quote. Well, Mr. President, the tragedy of it all is they apparently did have a rock-solid deal, because if you look at U.S. Senate votes after that backroom deal, which helped pass Obamacare, there were multiple individual U.S. senators who flipped their votes, made good on the White House rock-solid deal to kill reimportation, that opportunity for all Americans, particularly seniors, to be able to buy safe, cheaper prescription drugs from Canada and elsewhere. Let's look at votes on the broad reimportation bill led by then-Senator Byron Dorgan. I was a co-sponsor. So were many other senators who have been involved in this issue. John McCain, Olympia Snowe, many others. In 2007, the Senate actually passed that measure 63-28, although it was after that essentially scuttled by a poison pill added to the bill. But the vote on the base measure was 63-28, with 47 Senate Democrats voting yes, including then-Senator Barack Obama. Flash forward to 2009, after the Obamacare backroom deal, a whole different planet, a whole different landscape. Then the Senate defeated the same measure 51-48. There was a 60-vote threshold, with 38 Senate Democrats voting yes, a far smaller number, and 23 Senate Democrats switching their vote from 2007. Exactly the same measure. 23 Senate Democrats flip-flopped, switched their vote in light of the White House Obamacare deal. You can see a similar flip-flop with regard to votes on my Vitter amendment, a more narrowly tailored measure regarding reimportation. In 2009, the Senate passed that Vitter amendment, 55-36. Again, 45 Senate Democrats voted yes on that more focused, narrowly tailored reimportation amendment. But in 2011, after the deal, completely different story. The Senate rejected the same amendment, 45 to 55. Only 29 Senate Democrats voted yes. Again, 14 Senate Democrats switched their vote, did a complete flip-flop from 2009. So again, Mr. President, I believe the facts are in. Investigations, emails, other crystal clear evidence, including those votes and those vote switches, make it very clear that it was a backroom deal worth billions of dollars to Big Pharma, worth a lot politically to the Obama White House. And the deal, as is evidenced by these communications and quotes and emails, was very clear. Big Pharma said, we'll help you pass Obamacare. We'll give you $1 million in advertising money. We'll help lower costs so that you can brag that Obamacare is, through some smoke and mirrors accounting, actually saving money when it's not. And in exchange, you kill reimportation, which would lower prices on us and hurt our profit margin. And the White House said, absolutely, we agree. Senator Obama was full bore for reimportation. Candidate Obama campaigned on the issue and was very strong and vocal about it. President Obama cut the backroom deal and killed it. Those of us who are still fighting for lower prescription drug costs here in the Senate are, quite frankly, still reeling from this setback, still trying to deal with it. But I believe we ultimately will deal with it and will recover from this major setback when the American people fully realize what went on. The corrupt, I would say, backroom deal that was cut between the White House and Big Pharma, and how seniors and other Americans are paying the price. Mr. President, Obamacare passed and prescription drug prices continue to be sky high. They continue to hurt tens of millions of Americans, particularly those on a fixed income like seniors. And we continue to need a solution to that very real problem. That's why I'll continue to fight, Mr. President. I'll continue to fight for any measure that makes sense to lower prescription drug prices. Generics reform, other streamlining at FDA, and yes, reimportation, to level the playing field, to get a rural price on the drugs we use and not force a much higher price on Americans than virtually anyone else pays around the world. American seniors need that relief. I wish the Obama White House understood that and acted upon that. I wish President Obama kept his word that he made it as a senator and as a presidential candidate. But I'll continue to keep my word on the issue and to build that support for strong, effective reimportation legislation. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New York.
I rise today on a matter that has become very close to my heart, and that is honoring Raoul Wallenberg with the nation's highest civilian award, the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor. I urge my colleagues to support conferring Mr. Wallenberg with this honor, and I'm grateful that we already have 71 of my colleagues from every part of the political spectrum already supporting our effort. During World War II, Raoul Wallenberg chose to leave his life of ease in Sweden for a diplomatic assignment in Hungary, which was then an ally of Nazi Germany. His assignment was the result of a recruitment effort by the United States War Refugee Board and the Office of Strategic Services to try to save the remaining Hungarian Jews from the Holocaust. In his effort, Mr. Wallenberg succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. He provided Swedish passports for thousands of Jews, which literally made the difference between life and death. Mr. Wallenberg rented 32 buildings in Budapest, raised the Swedish flag, and declared them protected by diplomatic immunity. With these buildings, he's housed, protected, and saved almost 10,000 precious lives. Mr. Wallenberg's bravery, his will to act, are shining examples to us all. According to eyewitnesses, Mr. Wallenberg once climbed onto the roof of a train with departing Jews for Auschwitz, handing them protective passes through the doors. Amid threats from the guards, he then marched dozens of those with passes to safety in a diplomatic convoy. As the Nazi front was collapsing and Adolf Eichmann moved to kill all the remaining Jews in Budapest, it was Mr. Wallenberg who helped thwart that plan by threatening Hungarian leaders with the promise of hanging for war crimes if they carried out the plot. Sadly and selflessly, Mr. Wallenberg was later taken prisoner when the Soviet army liberated Budapest from the Nazis, and it's presumed that he died in a Moscow prison. This hero's willingness to risk his own life for others exemplifies his outstanding spirit, his dedication to humanity, and the responsibility for all of us to speak out against atrocities. His enduring legacy lives on in the countless of descendants of those he saved. The lives like New Yorkers, like Peter Rebenwurzel, a New York City resident whose late father helped Jews in Budapest ghetto, whose father-in-law only survived because of Mr. Wallenberg's heroic efforts. I'd also like to take the moment to recognize Andrew Stevens, who was an active member of the Jewish underground during the Holocaust, who worked bravely alongside Mr. Wallenberg to save Jewish lives. As we move to award Raoul Wallenberg with this Congressional Medal of Honor, upon the centennial of his birth, we pay tribute to an extraordinary man whose life should serve as a shining example to courage and leadership for all future generations to come. Now, I'd like to address the second issue of something we've been debating on the floor all morning, and that's the issue of jobs and what this Congress is doing to help our small businesses grow. I rise in support of the Landrieu Snow Amendment and the underlying bill, and these two proposals will address that every American expects us to take on. That's coming together to create jobs, help our economy grow, and focus squarely on the opportunities for creating our middle class the chance to thrive. All across my home state of New York, too many middle-class families are continuing to struggle in this very tough economy. Now, of course the government doesn't create any jobs. Businesses create jobs. Ideas, people, they create jobs, especially small businesses. Small businesses have been responsible for at least 60% of all new jobs that have been created. And small businesses can give us the spark that we actually need to create a growing economy and a thriving middle class. I've spent months going all across New York State having roundtables with businesses, and I've particularly hosted roundtables focused on women-owned businesses. I've been to restaurants, I've been to bookstores, I've been to recyclers, I've been to incubators, I've been to home stores, all businesses created by women all across New York State. And women-owned businesses are among the fastest-growing sector within the small business economy. More than 10 million businesses are owned by women, employing more than 13 million people and generating nearly $2 trillion worth of sales in 2008 alone. And even though women-owned businesses start their businesses with about 8 times less capital than their male counterparts, in the decade from 97 to 07, women-owned businesses added roughly 500,000 jobs to our economy. That's the kind of growth we need right now. That's the kind of spark that could actually make a difference. And we can do our part right here in Congress this week. It's time to end all the political posturing. It's time to come together around common sense, core ideas, like giving these businesses the tax breaks they need to grow. We shouldn't wait another day to eliminate capital gains on investments in these small businesses. We should extend the tax breaks for businesses that allow them to invest in new property, plant, or equipment and take those deductions up front. We should give them incentives to hire those new employees. And it's our responsibility as lawmakers to do this kind of work together in a bipartisan way, one that can set aside the political gamesmanship. And I know, just as women-owned small businesses are ready to lead to a lasting economic strength and growing economy, the women of the Senate are there to support them. Democrats and Republican women have come together around this bill in a bipartisan way to urge our colleagues to support it. Now, these tax provisions provide relief to the self-employed, to small businesses and their capital investments, and encourage new investment. They work hand in hand with other tax credits that encourage new hires and wage increases. And the combination of these things really will harness their full potential for our American businesses to grow. Now, we know these proposals are effective. They helped boost the private sector for job creation over the past 2 years. But we all know that there's so much more we have left to do. And we can start by renewing these common sense steps that unlock the power of our small businesses. Now, these aren't Democratic ideas. They're not Republican ideas. They're just good ideas. They're good, common sense ideas that can make a difference. We should be able to come together to do this for the American people to create a growing economy again. And I yield the floor and suggest an absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I ask that further proceedings in the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday, the Senate voted by a wide margin to proceed to Leader Reid's Small Business Jobs and Tax Relief Act. Everyone in this chamber claims to support both small businesses and tax relief. And Republicans know the best way to do that is to stop the $4.5 trillion tax hike that looms over the economy and its crippling job creators. Fortunately, there's an easy way to solve the problem. Vote on and pass Amendment number 2491, introduced by Senators Hatch and McConnell and co-sponsored by myself and several colleagues. The amendment is simple. It prevents the looming expiration of the 2001 and 2003 tax relief for 1 year and lays out specific conditions for pro-growth tax reform in the coming months. It is similar to the approach the House will take later this month. In other words, the Hatch-McConnell amendment stops income tax rates from rising. It stops capital gains and dividends rates from rising. It stops the job-killing death tax from rising and the related exemption from falling, and it prevents the alternative minimum tax from engulfing millions more middle-income Americans. It's an amendment that would protect our economy more than any debt finance stimulus bill or other kind of short-term tax credit that the Obama administration could dream up. And it's an amendment that, given the history of bipartisan support for tax relief in this chamber, should pass the chamber today. To be clear, stopping these tax hikes for 1 year is not a perfect solution. My preference is to continue the current rates as we move towards comprehensive tax reform for both individuals and corporations. But let's be clear about what the other options are. First, we could let the top two marginal tax brackets increase from 33% and 35% to 36% and 39.6% respectively. That's what President Obama and Leader Reid would like to do. That strategy means that almost 1 million business owners will be hit with a massive tax increase on New Year's Day, and that's according to the Nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation. That strategy means that 53% of business income will be subjected to a tax hike in order to fund the historic levels of spending from the current administration. The strategy guarantees that more jobs will be lost, that unemployment will stay high, and that economic growth will remain subpar. Let me just repeat that over half, 53%, of all business income would be subjected to this tax increase. If we do nothing, the current code expires and Americans will see over $4.5 trillion taken from the private sector over the next decade. This will help push us into a recession next year, according to the Congressional Budget Office. For any member of this chamber who cares about job creation and economic recovery, these two options should be unacceptable. They certainly were for President Obama in 2010. Less than 2 years ago, when President Obama signed legislation into law preventing taxes from going up on any American, he noted that tax hikes, and I'm quoting here, would have been a blow to our economy, just as we're climbing out of a devastating recession, end of quote. Evidently, 40 Senate Democrats agreed with the president, since they, too, voted to stop taxes from increasing in 2010. Well, what's the difference now? Our economy is in worse shape, growing now at less than 2%. At that time, it was about 3%. So there's even more reason not to raise taxes now than there was in 2010 when the president thought it was a bad idea. I want to echo the sentiments of Senator McConnell this morning. Even though the president's plan is bad for the economy, we should vote on it. And we should vote on the Hatch Amendment today. Let's show the American people where we stand. A unanimous consent agreement to do just that was blocked this morning by the majority leader, even though President Obama said the following just 2 days ago, quote, "So my message to Congress is this," the president said, "pass a bill. I will sign it tomorrow. Pass it next week. I'll sign it next week. Pass it next. Well, you get the idea." End of quote. Mr. President, we should follow President Obama's suggestion. We should vote on these proposals. Let's vote on his proposal. Let's vote on Senator Hatch's proposal. Senator Hatch's proposal will stop taxes from going up on any American. The other one will burden nearly 1 million business owners with job-killing higher taxes. I think Americans deserve to know where their elected officials stand on these critical issues. Mr. President, I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, is the Senate in a quorum call?
Yes, yes it is.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with,
Without objection.
and I ask consent to speak on an amendment that I send to the desk.
Without objection. Well, I'm sorry. Amendments are not in order at this time,
Excuse me, I ask
but it can be
permission to
submitted.
speak on a bill that I send to the desk.
The measure will be appropriately referred.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the parliamentarian for that clarification. Mr. President, I am introducing this bill today in response to a recent Supreme Court holding that invalidated the provisions of what has become known as the Stolen Valor Act of 2006. This Supreme Court decision regarded a place in the Stolen Valor Act that made all false statements about the receipt of military decorations a crime, stating that this act, in the view of the court, quote, seeks to control and suppress all false statements on this one subject in an almost limitless times and settings without regard to whether the lie was made for the purpose of material gain. And basically what the Supreme Court was saying is that you cannot freeze all First Amendment rights to make claims about anything in this society unless there was a purpose at the end of it in terms of some sort of a material gain. I would start by saying I understand and fully accept the court's holding in this case about the overly broad measures of the Stolen Valor Act of 2006. And the legislation that I'm introducing today is designed to remedy this issue and to bring criminal penalties to those who falsely claim military service or the receipt of unearned awards, medals, and ribbons if these statements were made in pursuit of a tangible benefit or a personal gain. This legislation is drafted under the guidance of the holding of the Supreme Court in this case. I am a strong believer in the First Amendment. I believe it is sacrosanct in our society. I believe the freedom to speak one's mind and to dissent when one opposes a proposal or an issue or a government policy is the very foundation of a truly free society. At the same time, the very special reverence for the First Amendment should be measured against the equally special place that our society holds for military service. There are strongly emotional reasons that this is so, and there are other clearly tangible benefits that derive from military service. Mr. President, I would point out something that for many of us seems obvious, but I think it needs to be restated as we consider the Supreme Court decision on the Stolen Valor Act and what the implications are for the legislation that I'm introducing, and that is that the experience of military service, and particularly hard combat, is a unique phenomenon in our society. There was a saying when I was in the Marine Corps many years ago that for those who have fought for it, freedom has a flavor that the protected will never know. Once you have been in hard combat, you will never see life around you in the same way again. That doesn't mean you'll be worse or particularly better or damaged or in some way empowered, but for the rest of your life, you will truly see a lot of things differently. You will have seen horrible things that strain your emotions and yet increase your ability to understand tragedy and to value human courage and many different stripes and forms. You will have learned to appreciate the inherent contradictions between the pristine intellectual debates about war and the reality of a blood-soaked battlefield where decisions must be made in an instant while human lives hang precariously in the balance. These realities comprise both the burden and the value of military service. neither the scars nor the lessons disappear when one leaves the battlefield or when one leaves the military. The men and women who step forward to serve carry this burden and share these values for the rest of their lives. Our veterans have given a portion of themselves to our country, and our country has always been good at reciprocating. Our veterans love America, and America loves her veterans. It's important to understand the impact that military service can have on one's life in order to comprehend what a disservice it is for others to pretend to have served. There's a little country song that says, "You've got to suffer if you want to sing the blues." Those who have not served have not paid the price that comes with earning the respect. And in many cases, they are indeed attempting to gain tangible benefits that have been designed to reward and honor military service when they pretend to have served. Here are a few of those benefits. They are in the legislation that I'm outlining. Benefits relating to military service provided by the federal government or a state or local government. The ability to gain employment or professional advancement. Financial remuneration, as, for instance, receiving money for books or writings related to the notion of having served. Seeking an effect on the outcome of a criminal or civil court proceeding, and seeking to impact one's personal credibility in a political campaign. There are others, but those all are clearly tangible benefits that come from stating that one served in the military when one did not. Mr. President, the journey of this stolen valor legislation begins with one individual who I've known for a very long time. His name is Jug Burkett. He was a Vietnam veteran. He is a Vietnam veteran. Like myself, he grew up in the military. His father was career military. He identified this problem many, many years ago, looking at the impact of those who had claimed to have served or who had claimed to have served in areas where they did not, on all of the areas that I just mentioned. He wrote a book many years ago called Stolen Valor. He had quite a journey with this book and has pursued the issue of honesty and integrity in our legal process and in other ways. And it was largely because of Jug Burkett's effort that the Stolen Valor Act was passed in 2006. The Supreme Court decision, I do not believe in any way invalidates the concerns that Jug Burkett and others have had on this issue. And in fact, I think what we are doing with this legislation is to make sure that the proper concerns are laid out without being overly broad, so that any words in a bar room or someone sitting around personally is not going to have the legal authorities measuring every single word anyone says. We have designed this very specifically with respect to the concerns that the Supreme Court laid out. I may be offering this amendment as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. My hope is that this amended language could gain the support of all of our colleagues and that we could move this bill quickly, perhaps as an independent bill. This bill respects the First Amendment, it respects military service, and it assures the special place in our society that has always been reserved for those who have stepped forward and gone into harm's way on our behalf. I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.